In this recap, we'll revisit the key moments from chapters 1 to 3 that lead up to the explosive events of chapter 5. The story follows Kang Igeon, a young man haunted by the tragic death of his father, who died saving him from an oncoming lorry as he dashed into the road to greet him. Consumed by guilt and a burning desire to change his fate, Kang vows to become a hunter, determined to lift the burden off his hardworking mother, whose quiet tears fall each night from exhaustion. One fateful day, out of frustration, Kang discovers his unique ability to regenerate when he cuts himself, though the healing process is excruciating. His mother finds him in a pool of blood, horrified, but he reassures her that he'll become a hunter to care for her. However, Kang's life takes a dark turn when 3 powerful S-Rank bullies begin torturing him daily, using his regenerative abilities as a twisted form of entertainment. Their cruelty escalates when they put Kang's mother into a vegetative state after being rejected at her restaurant. With their talents and promising futures, the authorities turn a blind eye, leaving Kang powerless and consumed with rage. Determined to seek revenge, Kang confronts his tormentors, but is brutally defeated and trapped inside a diamond coffin. Inside, he endures 5 years of agony, healing repeatedly as he punches through the spikes, his anger fueling his strength. Over time, his body evolves, forming a bone exoskeleton, until finally, he punches a crack through his prison. He interrupts a live interview where the bullies, now high-ranked South Korean hunters, speak of the incident. Without mercy, Kang slaughters the first 2 with brutal efficiency. But Crystal, the leader, seizes the opportunity and strikes back. Feeling the toughness of his target beneath his crystallized fist, he summons diamond spears that surround the building. The spears tear through the structure like blades through paper, and in an instant, they pierce every part of Kang's body. Horrified at the sight of his punisher slowly rising to his feet, Crystal reinforces his body in a protective diamond suit and begins to beat on his enemy relentlessly. However, Kang, now the unyielding exoskeleton-clad Immortal, catches one of Crystal's diamond fists with his mouth. Unlike their last encounter, this time, the diamond cracks under Kang's monstrous bite force. He doesn't let go, his bite stronger than a predator's, forcing Crystal to stumble back. After all, with 5 years of relentless practice, Kang easily pierces through the diamond armor at Crystal's chest. Desperate, Crystal touches the ground and summons a diamond mountain that crashes through Kang's torso, launching him into the air. But even as the mountain rips him away, Kang's jaws remain locked, severing Crystal's arm clean off in the process. Shocked and bleeding, Crystal retreats, clutching his stump, but Kang is relentless, like a predator snatching away hope as it's given. In a swift motion, Kang pierces the one-armed ex-bully through the back. Emerging from the chaos, Kang pulls the very spears that had earlier been embedded in his body and returns the favor, impaling Crystal. The terrified leader gasps, asking why Kang is doing this to him. Slowly, Kang peels the half-mask of bone from his face, revealing his true identity. Even in his final moments, Crystal spits venom, calling his punisher a worm. But his words are cut short as a bone sword impales the back of his head, driving through his mouth with ruthless precision. His body crumples to the ground, lifeless. Kang stands over him as rain begins to pour through the gaping holes left by the diamond's destruction. Dropping to his knees, he roars in triumph, victorious, vengeful, and unrelenting. As the roar fades and his rage settles, Kang exhales deeply, his mind shifting to the next move. A mysterious woman reveals she has been watching all along. She knows what the bullies did to his mother, but instead of stopping him, she makes an offer. She has kept his mother alive and can fully heal her if Kang slaughters Japan's strongest hunters. She explains that once monsters are slain, the portals remain open, allowing foreign hunters to cross into their country, and no one has been strong enough to stop them until now. She wants him to slay hunters as a monster to prevent an all-out war. With no other option, Kang agrees and begins his rampage, tearing through Japan's dungeons and killing anyone who crosses his path. After sitting atop a pile of slain hunters, waiting for someone stronger, Japan's #1 ranked hunter finally emerges in the dungeon. Tasked with conquering South Korea, he confidently believes he can handle it alone. He kills Kang, baffled at how his country's elites fell to someone like him. However, Kang's regeneration revives him. For 3 days, Japan's top hunter is missing, until his severed head is tossed back through the portal, shocking the crowd. Kang steps through after it, greeting the enraged Prime Minister of Japan with a swift slash that beheads him. But the Prime Minister, an SSS-Rank #0 hunter, has his own regeneration abilities. A strange, lava-like substance reattaches his head to his body, and with an explosive punch, he smashes Kang to the ground, leaving him unconscious and covered in molten lava. Chapter 5 opens with significant changes after a year-long absence. A live volcano looms at the city's edge, with molten veins of lava glowing ominously along its slopes. The sky above is tinged with a fiery red, casting a haunting light over everything below. At the summit of the volcano, the Japanese Prime Minister, Judo, stands with a commanding presence. His voice echoes through the air as he issues orders, stating that only the minimum number of people will stay while the others must return. His subordinates respond firmly, ready to follow his commands without question. Deep within the molten depths, a skeletal hand pierces the hardened volcanic surface, clawing its way out. The Japanese hunters had tried to imprison Kang, using powerful ice and fire magic to trap him in the volcano's core, where the elements violently collided. But now, from the fiery abyss, Kang rises, breaking free from the molten prison meant to hold him. The excruciating pain of the lava searing his bones is familiar, but no less agonizing. He has survived such torment within a blood gate countless times before. Despite his endurance, the agony never becomes easier to bear. A bone sword extends from his knuckles as his body begins the slow process of regeneration, with muscles and skin reforming over the exposed bones. Nearby Hanem, a beautiful brunette with frosty lashes, hears the dreadful sound of Kang's emergence. Worry fills her eyes as she turns to her lover, calling his name in distress. Judo, the Prime Minister of Japan, once older and bald but now with white hair on his head instead of his beard, hears her voice. He glances at the immortal adversary before him, still regenerating from the bone. Calmly but with purpose, he instructs Hanem to take the hunter and hide. With those words, Judo leaps from the volcano's edge to meet Kang head-on. The force of his landing sends a shockwave through the ground, causing Kang's still regenerating body to fly back. In a flashback, Judo is seen cleaning the blood from his mouth in a quiet room, wiping it from his lips with a towel. Hanem, standing behind him, gently questions whether he is overexerting himself. Judo responds with determination, explaining that Maga regeneration is not omnipotent. He reflects on Japan's comparative weakness against the four great hunter nations, the USA, China, Russia, and Japan itself. Judo acknowledges that without absorbing South Korea, survival would be impossible. His gaze falls on a large strategic map, filled with concern for his country's future. Hanem softly expresses her concern, noting that many of their hunters might also lose their lives. She holds his arm, offering him a cup of medicinal tea to soothe his worries. Judo, his resolve unwavering, declaring his willingness to continue fighting and protect his country, even if his body must be destroyed in the process. Back in the present, Judo times his lunge perfectly, striking Kang with a powerful right hook just as he nears the volcano's wall. The blow sends the immortal skeleton flying in the opposite direction, but Kang quickly regains his footing. Judo roars, wielding his lava-infused powers, prepares for another strike, sending a devastating firebolt toward Kang, whose face barely finishes regenerating from the molten damage. The flames instantly melt off Kang's arms, but the immortal swiftly spins his body away to minimize further damage. Judo leaps into the air, poised to deliver another critical blow. Above, at the edge of the volcano, Hanem speaks to her subordinates, relaying Judo's orders for evacuation. She insists that she will remain behind, while advising the others to leave. Her subordinates, filled with unwavering loyalty, kneel before Hanem. They express their gratitude, acknowledging the immense help they have received from the Prime Minister. Declaring their loyalty, they vow to protect him until the very end, addressing her as the Prime Minister's wife. As the Prime Minister, Judo, launches his powerful attack, his strike lands with explosive force, sending tremors throughout the volcanic landscape. He looks up, concern weighing on his mind, as Kang, reduced once more to a mere skeleton, begins to regenerate at a startling pace. Seizing the opportunity created by the aftermath of the blast, Kang propels himself toward Hanem, his skeletal form moving with terrifying speed. Judo, desperate to protect his wife, let out a yell while pursuing Kang closely. But Kang's bony hand was already just inches away from Hanem, poised to run its nails through her hair. The brunette, sensing the enemy's approach, quickly removed her glove, revealing a hand that constantly emitted a chilling ice, raising them in defense. Before she could act further, Kang grabbed her wrist, triggering her ice powers. The ice began to spread across Kang's body like a deadly virus, dragging both of them toward the volcano's fiery core. Despite the ice creeping over him, Kang's regenerative mana continued to work. A thin crimson line of energy swirled around his body, crackling with power and constantly healing his wounds. Meanwhile, Judo's fury echoed through the volcanic air as he flew toward them. His subordinates, stationed at the top of the volcano, jump into action, each preparing to attack Kang as they plummeted toward the molten lava. Kang, however, was not a mindless creature. His thoughts were sharp, calculating, and he was driven by an unyielding goal to save his mother. As Judo closed in, Kang made a desperate offer, but Judo, blinded by rage, ignored him. With a flaming strike from his bare hand, Judo severed Kang's frozen arm, which still gripped Hanami's wrist, exactly as Kang had planned. In one swift motion, Kang spun and sliced through the president's neck with his bone blade. Without hesitation, he manipulated Hanami's wrist, pressing her icy hand onto Judo's face. A nearby Japanese swordsman, leading the charge to rescue the Prime Minister and his wife, struck Kang, slicing off his frozen head, but it was too late. The freezing touch had already spread, encasing Judo's head in solid ice. The Prime Minister's heroic body lay still on the ground. Hanami knelt beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks as she called out Judo's name in anguish, his final expression locked in place. His tongue, frozen solid, protruded uselessly. Despite his body's efforts to generate heat and heal, the ice prevented regeneration. As lava crept closer, footsteps echoed in the distance. Kang, now fully regenerated, resumed his relentless advance. His foot crushed the shards of his previously frozen head as he continued forward. The subordinates, paralyzed at the base of the volcano, stood frozen in terror at the sight of the immortal Kang. Hanami, consumed by grief and exhaustion, watched Kang approach. Her tears fell freely, and as her eyes rolled back, she collapsed, fainting. Her mind filled with a vision of her and Judo lying in bed together, his hand holding hers as he asked if she was awake. In her vision, Hanami called out Judo's name, her voice trembling with desperation. The Prime Minister responded with concern, asking for Hanami. Shaken, she hugged him tightly, telling him she had just experienced a nightmare. The Prime Minister comforted her, assuring her everything was fine and that he was by her side. As Hanami kissed him, she opened her eyes and was met with a horrifying realization. This was no dream. She was holding the frozen head of the Prime Minister, her tongue stuck to his. Her eyes widened in terror as she understood she was trapped in a living nightmare. Her gaze drifted across the battlefield to the remains of her team, their limbs melting into the lava like meat in a stew. Kang stood silently, observing the destruction he had wrought. Hanami, in a state of shock and despair, let out a soft, broken cry. With a tormented murmur, Hanami touched her own face, activating her ice powers and freezing herself to death. The lava continued to spread, engulfing the Prime Minister's body, the remnants of his team, and Hanami herself, as Kang turned away and stepped through a portal, leaving Japan behind. In the mana stone storage room of the Kang Guild, where a large monument of red mana crystals stood, a man, Taesu, entered, followed by a woman. The woman warned Taesu not to overexert himself, reminding him that he had been the only one with mana left, which had barely saved him. His friend had not been so fortunate, their funerals confirming Taesu as the only survivor, though this was still unknown to others. Acknowledging the loss, Taesu recalled a boy from his past, someone he used to play with, who had escaped the Blood Gate and ultimately killed him. Reflecting on this memory, Taesu clenched his fist, vividly remembering the image of Kang staring at him with a look of triumph after peeling off his mask. Note, it seems the author may have altered the nature of Kang's imprisonment over the series, shifting from a diamond burial imprisonment in the earlier chapters to a Bloodgate imprisonment in later ones. Taesu, furious, referred to Kang as a worm and swore vengeance. The woman questioned him with concern, asking if he was ready. Taesu confirmed, as the S-Rank hunter Han Taesu dropped his gown, revealing a glowing scroll imprinted on his back. As the seal began to release, his body slowly crystallized, not in blue, but in red this time, a sign of his revival. The woman, struggling to breathe, looked down in exhaustion, raising her hand as she confirmed that the seal had been broken. With the seal released, Taesu demanded that all members of the Kang Guild be assembled immediately. Time fast-forwarded to the Kang Guild's main hall, where the guild members lined up before him. His right arm was already crystallized in its red diamond form. The guild's lead subordinate, Han Kyung-chan, head of the intelligence team, and an S-rank hunter stepped forward, bowing deeply and declaring his loyalty to Taesu. Behind him, two guild members whispered in shock, expressing their disbelief. They had thought Taesu had passed away, but it seemed the vice guild master had revived him. Kyung-chan addressed Taesu, confirming that the monster had moved to the gate after the massacre of Japan. He understood that Taesu's summons meant something dire. Taesu simply ordered that the target be killed. Kyung-chan, ever loyal, responded with praise, declaring that the intelligence team of the Kang Guild would swear on their lives to be of assistance to their master. Tae-soo decapitated Kyung-chan with a swift strike from his crystallized hand, catching the severed head before it hit the ground. Ensuring the last thing Kyung-chan saw was his master, Tae-soo drained the remaining mana from his lifeless body. The guild members stood frozen in shock, silenced by the sudden brutality. A trembling subordinate managed to speak up, but Tae-soo remained calm. He coldly remarked that Kang had once been the vice president of the Korean Hunter Association, and after its absorption 3 years ago, he had risen as Korea's dominant force. With chilling indifference, Tae-soo mentioned Kang's S-rank telekinesis as though it were an insignificant detail. Unmoved, Tae-soo proceeded to drain another subordinate's mana with mechanical precision. His cold, emotionless demeanor persisted, each act fueling his growing power. He recalls a memory of his female subordinate in a mana storage room, warning him about unsealing his power, calling it cursed. As the memory fades, Tae-soo, convinced of his unmatched power, coldly inquired if the remaining subordinates intended to assist him as well. His words carried an ominous finality. Without hesitation, he summoned diamond spears and mercilessly impaled those still standing. Chaos erupted among the guild members as they realized the hopelessness of their situation. Panic spread rapidly, with people frantically pushing each other in a desperate attempt to escape. But there was no way out. One by one, the 1,528 members of the Kang Guild fell, annihilated, their lives and mana consumed by Tae-soo's insatiable hunger for power. When the slaughter finally ceased, silence fell over the blood-soaked guild hall. Only one figure remained, a woman, her face buried in her hands, not in fear but in shame. Having witnessed the deaths of her former team members, her voice was calm yet hollow as she quietly asked whether he was okay. Amidst the carnage, Tae-soo, his face streaked with the blood of his victims, responded with simmering rage. He blamed the one responsible for killing the SSS-Rank Prime Minister for the devastation, but even after consuming the power from the massacre, it was still not enough. His gaze hardened as he vowed to destroy his true target, the worm. Yet reconsidering, he spoke the full name with venom, Kang Ji-hyun. Declaring his next move would be to Russia, his hatred echoed through the blood-stained halls. At the portal leading back to South Korea, Sim Jae-in, the S-rank healer and head of Korea's Hunter Association, stood waiting. Her once blonde hair now dyed black, she had promised to heal Kang's mother and had ordered the deaths of Japan's strongest hunters. When Kang emerged, Jae-in greeted him with a serious expression before leading him to where his mother lay. She explained that the healing process had already begun. She described her painstaking efforts to restore his mother's damaged cells, a slow process that would take time but promised she could save her. After using her powers, Jae-in left the room, visibly exhausted. She muttered that if she continued daily, Kang's mother would wake within the week. The strain became too much, and she collapsed, her assistant rushing to her side. Noticing Jae-in's condition, Kang questioned the cost of her continued healing. Jae-in, wiping the blood from her nose, took Kang's hand, her eyes glowing with determination. She told him that her efforts were for his survival and attempted to use her powers on him, but Kang pulled away, suspicious of her intentions. She then shares her observations about the changes occurring since the appearance of the Blood Gates. Jae-in explains that Kang's beastification has progressed within these gates. Since the gates first emerged 15 years ago, all other gates have slowly been transforming into Blood Gates. After Mr. Ji-hyun's escape, this transformation began to accelerate. Now all gates worldwide are turning into Blood Gates, and the mana flowing from them is fueling Kang's strength. According to Jae-in, if a regular gate is like a hole, a Blood Gate functions more like a passage, connected to somewhere, with something coming through it. From the window, they watched monstrous creatures emerging from Blood Gates, wreaking havoc across South Korea. Civilians fled in terror, their screams filling the air. Amid the chaos, a bloodied victim cried out in horror, asking what the creatures were. Despite the destruction, the president's office stood protected by a shimmering barrier. Inside, frustration mounted. The president demanded answers, furious that the Kang Guild was unresponsive. His assistant explained that the guild was gone, but details remained unclear. Faced with the situation, the assistant suggested seeking foreign help, but the president rejected the idea, ordering martial law despite knowing the military was powerless against the monsters. Clutching his head, the president reminded himself that other hunters remained, the second, third, and fourth-ranking guilds of Korea. However, before reinforcements could act, a colossal monster obliterated them with a single strike. The horrific scene caused those around to scream in terror, realizing how quickly their defenders had fallen. Kang, filled with frustration, cursed, questioning if all this chaos was because of him. Sim Jae-in, unfazed, simply asked what his next move would be. Nearby, a pretty brunette who had tripped while retreating in fear lay frozen in shock, her hopes shattered. Just as the monster's shadow was about to consume her, Kang landed as a hero of South Korea, slicing the creature in two with a single blow. Two swords, formed from bone, extended from his arms as he stood amidst the torn flesh, his gaze fixed ahead filled with fury. His thoughts turned inward, reflecting on his struggle within the Bloodgate. He remembered how its mana had tried to twist him into a creature, and how he had barely survived by gaining abnormal regenerative abilities. He now realized that this regeneration was not a blessing but a curse, binding him to life until he fully transformed into a creature of the gate. Frustration burned within him. Gritting his teeth, Kang questioned why he was dragged into this madness when all he longed for was a peaceful life with his mother. With a furious roar, he yelled at the monsters to leave him alone, tearing the eyes out of another beast with his bare hands as more creatures poured out of the Bloodgates. Meanwhile, a skeletal lord seated on a beastly throne in a distant realm observed Kang through a Bloodgate. With sinister curiosity, the lord wondered if this was the one who had caused the crack in their world, a chilling sign that Kang's true battle was only just beginning. In a flashback before the battle with the monsters, Kang assured Korea's Hunter Association head that he would eliminate all the monsters as long as his mother was healed from a safe location. Sim Jaeon, understanding the urgency, agreed to heal her from the association's underground bunker, urging Kang to fight with all his strength. As Kang fights on, Kang recognized the monsters before him. These were creatures he had fought endlessly within the Bloodgate for 5 long years. He recalled the cycles in which they would emerge, one wave after another, before activity would subside. Yet, as his thoughts drifted to dreams of a peaceful life with his mother, a sudden, piercing pain jolted him as a bullet struck the back of his head. Turning, he saw a barrage of bullets heading his way. Shocked and enraged, Kang faced a relentless assault from his own country's military, their weapons firing upon him with tanks and soldiers clad in reinforced armor. Among the soldiers, confusion rippled through the ranks. One soldier questioned whether they were truly meant to fire upon Kang, considering he had not harmed civilians, only monsters. However, the company commander dismissed any reservations, declaring Kang as the root cause of the current devastation. Orders were issued to restrain him until support arrived, yet the barrage of attacks only further ignited Kang's frustration and pain. Despite his regenerative abilities, each blast from the tanks left him in agonizing pain, forcing him to slouch in a monstrous posture, his body straining to regenerate before the Bloodgate. Echoing in his mind were Jaeon's earlier warnings. Suppressing the monstrous transformation will be nearly impossible with a Bloodgate active. This restraint slipped away as Kang unleashed his fury, standing behind the slain soldiers before him. Amid these memories, scenes from Kang's troubled past resurfaced. He remembered his childhood friend, a blonde boy who had once stood up for him against bullies like Han Tae-soo, insisting he stop enduring the abuse. Despite his loyalty, Kang had distanced himself to protect his friend. Unknown to Kang, the boy had used his unique ability, a recording power, to gather evidence of the bullying. Tragically, after submitting his findings, he was found with his right eye removed, the price for his bravery. Kang had visited his friend in the hospital, devastated, but the friend had only expressed regret that he could not attend school with Kang anymore. Furious, Kang had vowed revenge, but his friend, clutching Kang's collar, had begged him not to pursue it. Resigned, the boy had decided to join the army, accepting a life without his ability. Now, in a cruel twist of fate, this very friend lay severed on the ground among the fallen soldiers, forcing Kang to his knees in anguished mourning. As Kang grieved, another wave of monsters charged him from the Bloodgate, igniting his unrestrained rage. He tore through the creatures with raw power, slicing them apart, each blow fueled by both anger and sorrow. Meanwhile, at the Blue House, a presidential aide briefed the president on the chaos. They watched Kang's actions on the screen, noting that he was the same being responsible for the deaths of high-ranking hunters and the Japanese prime minister. The aide stated that killing him was necessary to restore stability to the gates, but they observed with confusion as Kang fought both monsters and soldiers. The president, lamenting the destruction, instructed the aide to contact foreign hunter agencies. Across the world, prominent hunters tuned in to the events. Lan Zigong, China's top hunter, watched with interest, gripping his unique poleaxe, which seemed almost sentient with its watchful eyes. In Russia, Sadamir Razana, a formidable SSS-Rank hunter, observed Kang's intense battle from her throne, a mix of shock and intrigue in her gaze. Meanwhile, still under her watchful eye, Stephen Lucas stood on a cliff shielded by a magical barrier from advancing hunters, listening to the cries of suffering from Korea. Clad in priestly robes, he abruptly declared he must leave, startling his subordinate, who tried to warn him about the war in Russia. Stephen dismissed the warning, claiming the war was over. Unleashing a surge of purple energy, black wings spread from his back, annihilating the enemies below. With a disturbing smile, he clutched a cross-chain, declaring it was time to go to Korea, his dark resolve unmistakable. Kang reflected on the 5 harrowing years spent battling monsters within the Bloodgate. Survival had been a brutal struggle, as he faced extreme conditions without food, water, or sleep. Each day, Kang fought exhaustion, barely able to keep himself alive. His mind, at times, drifted dangerously close to the edge, attempting the process of monsterification. Yet each time he neared that precipice, 2 faces emerged in his mind: his mother, left in a vegetative state, and Tae-Soo, the one responsible for her condition. Channeling his anger at Tae-Soo, he managed to prevent the transformation, using his rage to ground himself amid the horrors. Despite securing his revenge, Kang questioned his current strength, wondering if his resolve had weakened. He attributed the difficulty of controlling his power to the increasing strength of mana within the Bloodgate. Killing innocent people haunted him, and he vowed to slay all monsters, relentlessly battling wave after wave pouring from the gates, hoping to atone through his actions. In an instant, a sharp beam of purple light sliced Kang's head into 4. He gasped, his eye torn from its socket as he lay helpless on the ground, his exposed eyeball left vulnerable on the street, easy prey for a circling hawk. Instead, a priestly, angelic figure descended beside Kang's fallen body. As Kang's fading vision captured this angel's face, memories flooded back. The year the gates first appeared, a Christmas in America, when gates had opened suddenly within a church. A priest was performing his duties when monsters emerged, throwing the congregation into chaos. The priest urged his followers to escape, standing firm at the altar with a heart of steel, his follower begging him to flee as well. Yet, instead of fleeing, a blinding light manifested as a cross, and the priest unfurled a pair of angelic wings, obliterating the creatures. The incident was marked as America's salvation, a miraculous event with 0 fatalities and only minor injuries among a crowd of 100,000. This priest, revealed as the world's first SSS-Rank awakened, was none other than Stephen Lucas, a hero Kang had deeply admired from a young age. Now, in cruel twist of fate, this legendary figure stood as the one who struck him down, bearing the title of America's #1. As Kang's head rapidly healed, his mind struggled with confusion and pain, wondering why Stephen Lucas was in Korea. His thoughts barely settled before Stephen blasted him again, rendering his eyes bare and raw once more. Stephen observed Kang's resilience with growing frustration, noting that the monster would not die easily. Kang's body mended itself rapidly, bones and muscles knitting back together with alarming speed. Kang struggled internally, grappling with his own sense of humanity and identity. He knew his life and battles were his own, and he declared defiantly that he was not a monster. Watching him closely, Stephen summoned a cross-shaped burst of purple energy. Kang, seemingly mesmerized, found himself frozen, unable to move until he forced his body to evade the attack, stumbling to the ground as the energy missed him. Through the unique channel of mana, a form of communication without translation, Stephen finally questioned Kang. He began to realize that Kang might indeed be human. Reluctantly, Kang shared fragments of his story, hoping to explain. Stephen listened, and then, with tears in his eyes, embraced Kang and asked for his name. Kang introduced himself as Kang Igeon. Stephen, revealing his inner turmoil, explained that despite fighting to save people, he had killed many in the process. To remember them and atone, he tattooed each lost life on his own skin, pulling apart his priestly robes to reveal a body inscribed with hundreds of names. Standing before Kang, Stephen apologized solemnly, the most recent name now tattooed on his neck reading Kang Igeon. With his energy forming a blinding cross the edge of his hand, he placed it on Kang's forehead, the light piercing and branding his face. The painful light sank into Kang's being, marking him with an unmistakable symbol of Stephen's intent to kill him. Meanwhile, at the Korean Hunter Association, a screen displayed the priest's encounter with Kang, causing Sim Jaein to watch anxiously. Her subordinate, standing behind the room's viewing glass, looked on with concern for the association head. Suffering visibly with blood streaming from her nose and eyes, remained steadfast in her vow to heal Kang's mother, whose vacant gaze lay unresponsive. In spite of her pain, Sim persevered, hoping to keep her promise to Kang. Back in Russia, a frustrated Sadomir Rosanna cursed at the news of Stephen's actions. Furious at Lucas's insane massacre on the battlefield, she realized her forces had lost 80% of their strength, making it impossible to maintain the front line. If only they could capture the Arctic monster, she mused, they might still have a chance. Her thoughts were interrupted by Tae-Soo's confident entrance. With his ally by his side, he promised the capture she so desperately sought. The Arctic monster, an immense alien-like beast adorned with massive tentacles wrapping around its stomach and even larger ones spiraling from its head, stood as a towering SSS-Rank menace. With twin horns curving down along its jaw, this creature rendered humans insignificant, like ants at its feet. Its arrival in Russia's Arctic region annihilated the Russian base in a single step. Unprepared for the Gate and its monstrous invaders, the Russian government deployed its full military force but failed to subdue the creature. In desperation, they exhausted half of their nuclear arsenal against it. Yet, with no mana-based power, the assault was ineffective. The resulting radioactive fallout transformed northern Russia into a contaminated, monster-infested wasteland, driving the nation to declare war on America in an attempt to recover funds. In Sadimir Razana's Grand Hall, Taesu confidently offered to defeat the Arctic monster. The Russian queen sneered at him, mocking his audacity as a mere Korean S-ranked hunter daring to claim he could take on such a foe. With a gesture, she intensified gravity, pressing him and his companion down, cracking the ground beneath. Despite the crushing force, Taesu managed to push against it, claiming that he alone could defeat the beast. Skeptical, Sadimir questioned his ability to withstand the high levels of radioactivity, yet Taesu simply absorbed the gravity surrounding him. Surprised and intrigued by his mana manipulation, the queen agreed to his proposal, promising him half of the monster's mana stones if he succeeded. Taesu accepted and departed to face the creature, leaving his companion behind with the queen. Meanwhile, Stephen Lucas, America's notorious SSS-ranked hunter, continued his relentless assault on Kang, seeking to erase him entirely. With a sorrowful yet sinister determination, Stephen declared his intent to kill, unleashing a radiant, lethal light that disintegrated Kang's body piece by piece, until only an eyeball remained. A final blast sent the eye rolling behind a wall, allowing Kang a momentary escape as he rapidly regenerated. Catching his breath, Kang's mind raced. Realizing he could not withstand Stephen's overwhelming power, he peered around the corner, only to find his pursuer gone, leaving him uncertain and desperate. Suddenly, before he could plan an escape, Stephen Lucas reappeared behind him in an angelic yet deadly form with dark, powerful wings. Kang, turning just in time, managed to drive a bone sword through Lucas's head. Yet, even with black tears streaming down his face, Lucas gripped Kang in a lethal embrace. Stephen's arms pierced through the exoskeleton spikes on Kang's back as if unaffected, squeezing with a strength so intense that the veins on his forearms coiled like serpents. Cracks of purple energy illuminating the monstrous struggle as Stephen's power began disintegrating Kang's body. Fighting to survive, Kang clawed and stabbed Lucas with all his might, yet could barely move against the suffocating hold. Stephen, unfazed by Kang's resistance, taunted him, daring him to inflict all the harm he could muster. He told Kang that his regeneration couldn't be limitless. As Kang's eye attempted to escape, a force pulled him back into Stephen's grasp, forcing his body to regenerate once again. Stephen coldly declared that he would continue killing him without agony. Kang, trapped in a cycle of death and regeneration, swore in frustration. In the struggle, pictures of Kang's past resurfaced, particularly the time he was humiliated by Taesu in school. His ability, Exoskeleton Manifestation, allowed him to cover his skin with a protective shell, but it came with unbearable pain. Every moment was excruciating, yet he endured, driven by thoughts of revenge and hope. However, Lucas' instant death attack, which triggered rapid regeneration, easily surpassed all the pain he had ever experienced. Each time Kang was blasted, he was forced to regenerate repeatedly, and the agony never lessened. As Kang's suffering continued, his thoughts drifted to the day he first encountered Taesu at the Awakened Specialization High School. While watching a video of Lucas, a hunter Kang respected, Taesu mocked him, calling his exoskeleton manifestation disgusting and flipping him onto the ground. The memory of that moment still haunted Kang in the present. Amid his pain, Kang questioned why he had to endure so much suffering. Images of his failed revenge, his torment in the Blood Gate, and the deaths of those he cared about flooded his mind. A voice from his past, a younger version of himself, suggested that if they continued to live, more innocent people would die. Yet, even if they perished, the survival of Kang's mother would be enough. But Kang refused. With a twisted grin and a defiant gesture, he raises a middle finger at the taunting voice in his head. Regenerating faster than ever, his eyes burn red with mana, surrounded by a blood-colored aura. Above him, several open blood gates empower him further as energy courses through his body. Fueled by rage, Kang loosens the grip of his former hero, and with Bloodgate energy strengthening his regeneration, he unleashes a devastating blow. Blood drips onto the asphalt as Lucas, standing beneath the stars, is left severely wounded. His angelic purple-winged form has vanished, and a gaping hole in his stomach bleeds profusely. Lucas looks at the blood on his hands in disbelief, realizing that his own limits have been surpassed, not Kang's. A drone capturing the scene broadcasted the showdown to audiences far away, including a young boy watching from America. The boy, gripping a cross that matched his hair, whispered a single word, "Dad." At the Korean Hunter Association building, chaos loomed as the shield protecting the structure had been destroyed, and the top part of the building was on the verge of collapse. In the underground bunker beneath, Sim Jae-in worked tirelessly, once again healing Kang's mother. Her assistant, noticing the toll the healing was taking on her, approached in a state of panic. The assistant, alarmed by Sim Jae-in's deteriorating condition, voiced concerns, noting the dark veins forming on her hands and the blood pouring from her face. As her condition worsened, her cheeks swelled, and she collapsed, coughing up a pool of blood. In a frantic attempt to help, the assistant yelled out, calling for the president, ensuring that she didn't choke on her own blood by slightly raising her head to the side. Sim Jae-in, despite her suffering, softly stated that the treatment was complete. Kang's mother, lying in the bed in a weakened, starved state, slowly opened her eyes, her brown pupils gazing blankly at the ceiling. Well, that's it for this intense chapter. If you're liking the story and want more, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next one.